Flat colored backgrounds are, well, flat. It doesn't take much to punch up all that space, so put on your artist's beret and get pouncing for a beautiful pointillist effect. Every technique video is narrated live while I'm doing the technique, so you're getting a real-time view of how the whole process works. Pull out the supplies I'm using and create right along with me, pausing as you need. Before we get started, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. I appreciate it. When we're doing any kind of coloring, we always want to add some interest to the background. And I know that it's very easy to just want to color it in a solid color, but there's a problem with that. So first of all, it's going to look maybe a little bit one note because it's just a flat color. And secondly, you might end up getting some little variations as you go because of like the markers that you're using or just the pressure from your hand or whatever. So there is a way for us to really punch up this look without doing much, and that is by adding a pointillist effect to the background. And pointillism is simply just a dotted pattern that you're going to put in to create illusions of depth and shadow. All right, so I am super zoomed in here, and for our first effect, we're going to look at a monochromatic look. Now, you're going to achieve this by using colors of the same family, but varying lightness and darkness. And then if you're using something like a watercolor or especially with your alcohol markers, you're going to want to grab your colorless blender to create this effect. Now, for this effect, I'll be using just my alcohol markers, but you can achieve this by using colored pencils, watercolor, any other coloring medium where you can kind of control how the color goes down and how you can blend your colors together. So for our monochromatic look, in this one here, I have the lightest color, this mountain mist, done up in the entire background. And this looks okay. You can see we've got some light areas and things like that, but this is dry at this point. And now I want to start adding in a little bit of that pointillism effect. Now there's two ways that I can go about doing this. I could start with just my colorless blender and only use my colorless blender. Now, if you're using your markers, you're going to want more of the bullet nib end, so that way you can literally just pounce and create that effect. So let me show you what that looks like if I just use the colorless blender. So let's say we want to do a little bit of that around here. I'm just adding these little dots. Do you see how that's working? And with the colorless blender, what's going to happen is it's going to push the color that's on the paper out of the way. And closer to the image, I'm putting more dots, and then I'm going to space them farther away as I go. And the longer the nib ends up on the paper, the more it's going to push that color away. And this is going to create a very subtle effect. But the great thing about it is that a little bit of work with just your colorless blender is already going to create a really neat effect. So on the front side here, I'm just going to use my colorless blender. So again, closer to the subject, I'm going to make more dense dots. So they're going to be closer together. And then maybe I'll even just press down a little bit longer to get the color to push out of the way a little faster. And then as I get farther away, less dots. You can go over and over and over this until you achieve the effect that you're looking for. All right, so can you see the difference? This is very subtle, but this little bit of texture really is just adding a whole lot to what is going on with this image here versus something that was plain than that, like this one here. So you can really see the difference between the two, and this is already making a huge difference. So like I said, working with a colorless blender is very subtle. If you want a more dynamic look, you're going to want to grab some markers or pencils or whatever that are in the same color family, but just darker. And you're going to want to start layering those in. So I'm going to move to the next darkest in this particular marker family. And I'm going to start adding in those same dots, maybe some far away. And then again, as I get closer to the subject, I will add more. Again, this is really up to you how you want to do the color. If you want to add darker and darker and darker, you can do that. If you only want to use one, you can do that too. All right, and you want to like get into these little nooks and crannies here where it would, you know, definitely be darker. Like here between our hands. And as you can see, it's just going to kind of melt in a little bit and give you that effect. You can continue on with darker and darker colors, just making sure that as you're adding in those darker spots, you're just staying more close to the subject. So I'm not going to come out here with this next darker shade. I'm going to stay kind of closer to her hairline here. And you see I'm not going to put them everywhere. And in here I'll just stick really close to her neckline, close to her hands. And again, the same thing here, close to her hands. And maybe not everywhere either. Right, and again, you can go for your next darkest. Keep going and going and going, as much depth as you want. See here, I'm starting to skip a few little places. I'm just really following her contours. And this is giving me some really interesting shading effects with that whole pointillism concept. All right, so this is the monochromatic way to add that kind of effect to your project. You can do it with different shades of the same color, or you can use your colorless blender to create a very subtle effect. For an even more dynamic look, you may want to put in a different color. So I have a few of the green colors here. So the original that I did in this Mountain Mist, and then I also have the Volcano Lake here. And I'm going to just add in a little bit of the Volcano Lake to start giving this a little bit of depth. And that's going to help these colors kind of play off each other. So I'm going to go all the way around. And just add a little bit here. These are going to be largely covered up by the opposing color, so I'm not too concerned about how much I've got going on here. It's just going to kind of get this area re-wet and start it getting some darker qualities to it. So now I've got a little bit of a darker green on there. Now I'm going to go into something completely different, some shades of purple. And again, I've got light to dark. When I use a lighter shade, especially with, of course, our alcohol markers, you have to remember that there is a lot of colorless blender in your lighter shades. So because of that, it's going to start pushing those colors out of the way. You may not want to use a super light shade because you may not want to get that blooming of color. Or lack of color. So I'm going to skip this one for now. We may come back to it, but I'm going to start adding in this purple. And this is going to add a great amount of contrast, but it's going to look really, really cool. So again, just like with the monochrome version, I'm going to get some color right up against the subject and then make some dots further away, and spacing them farther apart the further away I get from the subject. So again, in these spaces here, I want to add a fairly high concentration. I don't want to cover up all of the green. I want to be able to see that through. I want these colors to blend together. All right, so already this is a very interesting look. And it looks really, really cool. So continuing on with our lighter shade of purple, going all the way around the subject. All right, so there is my first pass, and this is with the lighter shade of pink, not the most light. Like I said, this one's got a lot of color splendor in it, so I'm going to avoid using this one. So I started with a lighter shade, and I'm going to move into my next darker shades. And again, just like the monochrome version, as you go through, you're going to want to keep your dots closer to the subject and not put any extras out further away. As you're working with your darker colors, do make sure that you're staying pretty close to the subject. So you almost want to actually create that line, but not quite. We want to see those little dots. So don't be tempted to swipe the line. Keep making all of those little dots, but keep them pretty close together. And the cool thing is that you still can see some of the green through there. It's mingling together, but it's not turning into a muddy mess. It's really a gorgeous effect. All right, now before you move on to your last color, you want to make sure that it doesn't have too much of like this kind of halo-y effect to it. So you may want to take that second to last color that you were just working with and maybe push it out a little further in places. So like I saw right in here, it looked like it was just following her contour too much. I really want to make this area a little darker. So I am going to kind of push this out just a little bit further than I had originally. You just have to use your artistic eye to make that decision. And if you feel then that you've gone out too far, or you haven't then gone far enough with your first color, now's the time to add in some extras of that very lightest shade. There, see, that's a little bit less form-fitting around the subject. I like the way that that looks a little better. Okay, so now I can go to my darkest shade and then use this selectively to add in depth in only certain areas. So just like with the monochrome, say I'm not going to put this everywhere. I'm just going to hit those really dark areas where I want more of a shadow. Again, don't be tempted to swipe or make any other shape. You just want to continue on with these little dots to achieve this really amazing effect. So there you have it, whether you choose to use just the colorless blender or to go monochromatic or to add a little bit of contrast with some extra color. You've got 3 amazing ways to add gorgeous texture and depth to the backgrounds of your colored projects. I hope you enjoyed this technique and you add it into your toolbox sometime soon. When you give it a try, share it out on Instagram and tag me at NicoleWattCreates. I always love to see what your creative mind is thinking. Thank you so much for spending a little time with me today. And until next time, happy crafting.